My guest tonight is Jay Dyer. He has agreed to return to discuss more about his ongoing series, Tradegy and Hope. He's calling us from the road. Jay, how you doing tonight?
Doing great, Tim. Thanks.
Yeah, so of course, Jay is the proprietor of Jay's Analysis, jaysanalysis.com, where he analyzes popular culture, literature, history, geopolitics, you name it. He's got a book coming out, I guess, sometime in the fall, Esoteric Hollywood.
Right.
And, let's get into it. Tradegy and Hope, Part 3. In Lecture 2, last time we talked about Lecture 2, and we covered, the First World War, the imposition of reparation payments on Germany, the creation of the Bank for International Settlements, and how these developments set the stage for the engineered booms and bust and the economic crisis of the 1930s. You followed up in the third lecture talking about, the banker financed Bolshevik Revolution, Stalinism, and what Stalinism represented not only to Russia but also to the world, particularly the New World Order. And you also referenced a very interesting piece by Kerry Bolton regarding Stalin and the rise of the Third Reich and what that represented. You also covered the outbreak of the Second World War and how that conflict, according to Quigley, and I think it's a good case made for that conflict, that rather large conflagration, was an Atlanticist strategy to destroy both Germany and Russia as continental powers, the easier way to, a globalist New World Order.
Yeah, exactly. I think that sums up the thesis of the third lecture, and I think it begins with kind of where we left off with League of Nations and free trade. And of course, as we said, the free trade here is not what it sounds like. This is a form of economic terrorism and economic warfare, just like the reparations were. And what this did was it excommunicated Germany, or it was going to excommunicate Germany, if Germany didn't go along with the Atlanticists from the global economic structure as it was. That was part of the purpose of the BIS, so that you could have a soft power economic attack upon nations that don't go along with the plan. So sovereign nations are, of course, a long-time enemy. And as we've seen with Brexit, the globalists are not unaware of nationalism. They're very aware of it. They know that it's going to be the natural reaction to internationalism. And that, unfortunately, they usually have the chess piece moves planned out several steps ahead, right? They're like Gary Kasparov or something, right? And we saw Gary Kasparov calling for Brexit being, was it Kasparov or the other? I guess the other, yes, Kasparov was saying, he's kind of a CIA guy. He's like a fuck piece saying, oh, this is so bad, because now Putin's going to win a victory with Brexit. But the reason for the EU and Brexit and all this recent kerfluffle, I think I'm saying that right, is because of what we're going to talk about tonight with the erection of the post-World War II, post-World War I and then post-World War II structure of economics with BIS and Bretton Woods. And then, but before we get to World War II, we have to understand Stalinism, and that's what I talked about quite a bit. Now, I'm not an expert on Stalinism, but I wanted to try to come to the table with as much insight as I could get, because there's quite a bit of debate, and differences of opinion from historians and analysts when it comes to Stalin and Stalinism, how that plays into Churchill and Hitler and all this drama and all that. So, but I think we step back and we keep focused on the big picture, the meta picture analysis. We can understand that, like you said, and as Friedman from Stratfor said very recently as well, the whole purpose of all of this was the weakening of Germany and Russia. Now, what do Germany and Russia represent that Quigley doesn't understand? Well, he understands it in part, but he thinks that they're all just backwards dummies and superstitious idiots. Well, Germany represents Austro-Hungarian Empire, Catholic power. Russia represents Orthodox Christianity, another imperial Christian power. And there's a very, very clear section in Quigley in the last lecture that I covered, where he says all of this does represent the end of imperialisms. And what he means by that explicitly, he says, is the end of Christian civilizations. And so what does it mean? Well, it means the erection of democracy, the democratic society, the liberal scientific order, right? Basically, the Masonic order. And that's the element that Quigley, of course, never goes into anything conspiratorial. He dances around that. But very, very clearly, that's the ideological background, is definitely the Masonic, rationalist, democratic, so-called Republican order. And that's what replaces the existing power structures and governments. And that is an internationalist force. Masonry is, although there may be at times Masonic movements that tout nationalism, that's all just theatrics. Ultimately, it is, I believe, a tool of the Western intelligence, British intelligence establishment especially, to foist Atlanticist ideologies and destructive ideologies, subversive ideologies in different nation states to destroy them and to then corral them into the global order. And so that's what the 20th century is about. It's about making sure that Germany and Russia never align, because that would be probably death to the Atlanticists. And this is what we see Brzezinski talk about, right, in Grand Chessboard, the Eurasian landmass and so forth. That's what has to be controlled according to that theory, that school, to run the globe in terms of geostrategy. And then, of course, as we said, the economic system requires free trade, BIS, and that's, of course, based on the dollar system. So that's where we are, and this is what's going to lead to World War II. I dove pretty deep into what I understand of the different schools of Eastern Bloc Marxism versus Frankfurt School Marxism versus classical Marxism from Marx. And Marx isn't new. You have to keep in mind there were some people who were critical that I talked about Illuminism. I'm not wrong in that. The Illuminist tradition of Weishaupt is communism. Weishaupt was a radical communist, and as were his Jacobin successors and progeny, and then by extension, so were Rosa Luxemburg and the other Marxists and communists who continued that tradition, Antonio Gramsci and others, right? And so this is important because even though it may not be the same flavors of Marxism or socialism, this becomes a powerful ideology in the 20th century, whatever you think of it, right? This is more or less the ideology behind the EU, even though it might be persons who had fascist tendencies at Bilderberg who created the European Union. The outworking of it is this bureaucratic socialist nightmare, and it's completely antithetical to traditional thought, traditional religions, and so forth. It's atheistic, it's Masonic, hence the European Union symbol being the Tower of Babel. Now, anyway, that's how, what we're seeing is, what I'm getting at here is just that the architecture of our world is based on what we see Quigley explaining, right? And so this is where we are today. This is why Dugan, for example, pointed out that Britain exiting the EU is important, but it really depends upon what Germany does, right? And Germany is very much controlled by Western powers. The CIA is all through Germany. They have huge facilities in Germany. So, unless we see something on the part of Germany breaking a part of the EU, we're not going to see much change, at least, although I view Brexit as very symbolic, and it's definitely a good trend, right? But I don't expect to see anything exactly change. But I do think we're seeing the slow death of the West, as Spengler talked about. But anyway, back to Quigley. So Stalinism is important, and Marxism and Bolshevism, and I think Quigley treats all of that fairly well, although he's still somewhat of a propagandist. As Bolton points out, it's Quigley who talks about the fact that Stalin does not take the CFR plans for convergence. He rejects the money that's offered by the CFR and the bankers. And then, of course, as we talked about last time, you had that split between two wings of the CFR. You have that Dulles CIA Nazi style that doesn't want anything to do with Marxism and communism, and then you have the Alger Hiss side of the CFR, all of which is at the CFR archive publicly, by the way. None of this is conspiracy literature. But yeah, Quigley pretty much echoes all this. And so this is why you have disagreements over what course the American power needs to take in relationship to the Cold War. But of course, this is, we still haven't gotten to actual World War II yet. But anyway, so Stalinism and Marxism are on the table now.
So you can look at Stalin as sort of a unintended hero. According to,
yes, and so Trotskyism, Bolshevism, for those who may not be trained in all the endless labyrinth of neologisms and pseudo-philosophical babblings from these people, and I've read these people, I've had grad classes on them. It's just more or less insanity when you try to read Lenin and Trotsky and these different peoples, but these thinkers. But so with Lenin and Trotsky, you have international Bolshevism, and it's an international movement for international communism. And the reason that Stalin differs is that there's a little bit of a laxing towards capitalism and production. There's a bit of a laxing in terms of economic techniques and procedures, although not in agriculture. Stalin starves a bunch of people. But Stalinism is considered to be national Bolshevism. And so this is the idea that each nation should have its independent form of socialism, purportedly. And this is, of course, why there was a big divide between the Bolsheviks and Stalin.
Socialism in one country, yeah.
And so this is, of course, why, reportedly at least, he has Trotsky killed in Mexico.
And what's important, of course, we've mentioned this before, and our listeners are probably familiar with this point, is that Bolshevism, particularly the Trotsky brand, was imported. The Trotsky-Leninist brand was imported into Russia from the West,
absolutely.
Financed by Western bankers, spearheaded by Jewish bankers, I think for ethno reasons, because of Russia's history with the Jews, that particularly the Jacob Schiffs and the Wahlbergs were particularly keen on undermining and weakening the Russian autocracy, so they could be used in this endeavor.
I read Warburg's letters, and he talks about it, so absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, this is all part of a plan. Now, you mentioned Anthony Sutton when you're talking about Quigley's analysis of the situation, and of course Anthony Sutton adds particular insight into this case because he proved he had the bank slips and the paperwork and the paper trail that indeed the Bolsheviks were funded by the West and they could not have succeeded without Western support. He seemed to believe at the time. Of course, he died in, I believe, early 90s, or maybe a little later than that.
80s or 90s, yeah.
Actually, he died 2001, I believe. Yeah, 2001.
Oh, wow.
I think it was 2001, if I recall properly. But anyway, in several interviews, his belief that the reason for that was the idea of captured markets, the idea that they could destabilize Russia if it were allowed to develop into a sort of a moderate, so we say, his interpretation, to like a modern constitutional monarchy with markets and industry, that it could compete with the West financially, and also the West coveted its vast resources, which is Russia's, trump card and all that. That this is a way to capture the markets, take Russia offline, destabilize it, then move in for the kill to take care of, to take advantage of all the chaos. And we've seen this strategy played out throughout Africa and Latin America and Asia.
Well, it's the same basic strategy with Hitler too.
Yeah,
Hitler is favored by the British elite and built up by many of the same Western elites.
Mm-hmm. So
I'm not denying that there's a real difference on the part of certain, say, Henry Ford. I think Henry Ford really believed in Nazism. Or at least he seems to, from what he talks about in his books. His book, especially on, he has a book on Nazism. So I think that for certain persons, I don't think Henry Ford likes Bolshevism. But what I'm saying is that in the larger geopolitical strategy, it still works to weaken both Russia and Germany. And what I think is that they tailor specific ideologies to different people. Nazism obviously is not going to work in Russia, even though I guess there have been white supremacists in Russia and so forth. But
I think it
works well for Germanic ideology. Right?
Yeah, Paul Johnson stated well. He said Russia could be raped, Germany need to be seduced.
There you go.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's it.
Okay, that was in modern
no,
times.
You said it. You said it much more succinctly.
Well, Paul Johnson. I'm quoting Paul Johnson. So, but that's you have to sell. Well, like I said, I think Mark Hacker made a point, and you've made this point too, that these ideologies are technologies or tools to be used. The guiding ideology of the Atlanticists, I think, could be summed up just in power, gaining power. This is why the Masonic model works so well for them, because it's a tool for subversion.
Yeah.
Yeah. But when we're talking about Stalin, we said Stalin versus the New World Order, and Stalin is unintended hero. We're not, ignoring his crimes that he committed to attain power and achieve power, and what Stalinism meant for millions and millions of Ukrainians and Russians and many other people. But we're looking at this in terms of power blocks and checking checks and balances and competing power blocks. But to put this in perspective about what did Russia represent under Stalin vis-a-vis the West, and then let's call it the New World Order, the Western powers. He wrote an article back in 2015 about Kim Philby, and he explained Kim Philby's betrayal, and he summed it up this way because he said there was a greater betrayal that maybe caused Philby's disillusionment with the powers that he worked for, the British Empire. And I'll read the quote here. He says, Cold War to the end, Philby staked out his own duplicitous role in the bipolar confrontation between capitalism and communism. Yet, largely unbeknownst to the rank-and-file soldiers of either side, the planned outcome of this dialectical clash was universal tyranny. Just as the Marxists appealed to the inevitability of history, so the plutocratic Western superclass, quite openly through theoreticians from H.G. Wells, Aldous Huxley, to Bertrand Russell and Zbigniew Brzezinski, have trumpeted the supremacy of science just to justify their will to total power. The technocratic world state and madman's dream threatening transmutation into our reality would make the Soviet project seem childish play acting in comparison. Kim Philby was doubtless a traitor. Levels above him, criminals far more grandiose have been engineering the annihilation of the family, national and religious heritage, and the very essence of human identity. Herein lies the greatest betrayal. I thought that was a great...
I think, is that from Mark's article on Kim Philby you're saying? Yeah, it's a classic. I love that article. Yeah, that's kind of what they're the best at, I would say, is deflecting, making you think that the enemy is somebody that it's not.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In other words, that during the Cold War, everybody's fighting enemies who probably have more in common than they did with those who are really running things. And that's the point, is that these are the people that are the technocrats. And Quigley will have an entire section where he talks about that the future of global government is technocracy. It's management by experts. It's going to be it is Bertrand Russell state. That's why I always come back to that, because I don't think, we might hear these things bantered about, but I don't think we understand that it really is straight out of the Royal Society. These are the people who have concocted the New World Order. It's H.G. Wells, The Shape of Things to Come, right, where he has this idea of the great leader that kind of is the opposition, this great rebel. Right, and so I think that the British fiction writers, tend to, like Orwell, they'll write into the fiction this ideas of, that the opposition can't win, and I think that's kind of a psyop too. That you can never oppose this, right? You're never going to win, right? Eurasia or any opposition to the Ministry of Truth is fake. There's no Emmanuel Goldstein. There's no real war. You can't oppose us. We win. We have every side. I think that's part of the psyop, is what I'm trying to say. And that doesn't mean that I think that there's some perfect ideological movement out there that we can just latch onto. But I've seen enough of how British writers write, and I think that they do write that way. I mean, they're the masters of propaganda. They've been doing it for hundreds of years through the empire, and then now it's the American empire, which is the frontispiece. It's the shell corporation for this Atlanticist establishment. But yeah, so when we come to Stalinism, is that really the enemy? Well, in certain ways, you have levels of this playing out. You and I have discussed this many times, where people in the West think that they're defending markets and freedom and religion, and Stalinism represents, atheism and the godless empire and all this stuff, much of which is, of course, propaganda. But the real enemies are above that. They're a level above that, and it's simply because people can't conceive of the enemies being at a meta level above that they get away with so much of what they promulgate.
Yes. And I think you stated in your talk, you said, well, the real enemy is, the tough thing to accept is the real enemy is the liberalism.
I totally believe that, yeah. And that's why when you look, it's interesting because I haven't seen anybody else really touch on this from Quigley. I haven't read Joe Plummer's book, so I'm sure he probably does, but I don't know. But I listened to the interviews, but Quigley states that the continental bloc model on pages 364 and 65 is the model that all of them had. So, in other words, even though the West proclaimed itself as libertarian or democratic or whatever terms you want to use, supposedly, freedom, democracy, it was still a continental bloc internationalist model. The Stalinists, even though they might have claimed themselves to be national Bolshevists, it was still based on a heavy network of spies in other countries, right? Bolshevism was international. And even though the Reich was German tribalism, it had the same plan of continental blocs. And so they're all fighting for the New World Order, is what I'm trying to say. In other words, what I mean by that is that all of them realize that it's a global power block model, and Quigley says this. He says it's 20th century politics moves into the great power politics. And he's talking about power blocks. And the only way to work with the system that exists is to have continental trading blocks. And everybody had that model, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So it's the question of who's going to rule those continental trading blocks. And Germany had its aspirations, and there was a lot of real reaction against the reparations and against the raping and you said seducing Germany, right? And you had a nationalist reaction that was in ways, I guess you could say liberal. The National Socialist Workers Party was in a way a leftist party because it was supposed to be a people's party. Because you could debate how far that was true, but it seems to have an ideology, I believe, if you look at somebody like Alfred Rosenberg, that's crafted. It's a crafted ideology that's going to borrow from Teutonic paganism. It's going to borrow from Germanic tribal traditions. It's going to borrow from Roman imperial traditions, and it proclaims itself the Reich, right? The next 1,000-year reign. And Russia also has the same tradition or ideology, believing themselves to be the Third Rome, right? Because in Orthodox theology, the Roman Catholic Church fell, right, a long time ago, 1054 or so, depending on where you want to date the division with Photius of Constantinople. And so Russia sees itself as the final and third Rome, of which there will never be another Rome. And so they see themselves as the tradition of the continuation of Eastern Byzantium, right? So the Byzantine Roman Empire was split between East and West after Constantine created Constantinople. With the fall of Rome, all that's left in the West is the papacy. This is, of course, why the papacy plays, I believe, such a large role in Western Christianity. But we don't understand this oftentimes, but if you read, for example, the work of Father John Romanides, a Greek priest who's written a lot on the history of Byzantium, Byzantium and Greece and Cyril and Methodius, they all saw themselves as continuations of the Roman Empire. It was just the Eastern Roman Empire, right? So that's the heritage of Russia, right, with the creation of the Cyrillic alphabet, right? And so what I'm saying is that you have competing imperial ideologies, and that's what Quigley's talking about. But he, as a propagandist, sees the destruction of both Austro-Hungarian Catholic imperium and Russian imperium as the end of dark ages of superstition and the new age, the new dawn of enlightenment, scientism, technocracy, all the things that you were describing about Bertrand Russell and Huxley and H.G. Wells about demons. And so that's why this is so important, right? He literally believes this is the hope for the world. So he buys his own bullshit. But I'm rambling here, but yeah, that's
well, yeah. I mean, the book. I think he, although it's an apologia for the Atlanticist powers, just by default, keen eye can see it as also revelatory or an expose on how the system works.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, because he's accessing the CFR papers and he's writing for them, supposedly, like sort of an internal history, a guidebook, and that's sort of the so it's been reported that the book was supposed to be used for that, sort of as a manual or guidepost for people working within the system, how to view themselves. And
have you heard that it was given to CIA section chiefs in the 70s? Is that, I've heard this bantered about, but I don't know if it's true.
Heard that, no proof.
Okay.
I've heard that this would. I mean, you could see how this would build its own ideology, right? Its own little mythos to justify. You said how Quigley, he says, the fall of Austro-Hungarian, the Catholic Empire, and the fall of the Russian, the Byzantine Orthodox Empire, and what's left is the pluralistic society.
Yes.
Free democracy. And you said, well, this is what this really is. This democratic order that we live under is really just a cover for banker oligarchy and what you refer to as the occult empire, which is Albion, right?
Yeah, the banker Masonic Albion mythos. Yeah, right.
And you get everyone thinking this is Masonic design. We have rings within rings, right? Well, the outer rings buy into the into the benevolent nature of the system, and as you get deeper and deeper into the system, the rings deeper, whether higher degrees or deeper in, however you want to look at it, you start to see the malevolent nature of this empire.
Yes, and I did a really good interview 2 or 3 years ago with James Kelly, a friend of mine who's written on a lot of these topics. His book, Anatomizing Divinity, is really good because it traces the ideological changes of the West over time, all the way up into the technocratic technological revolution and scientific revolution, and how this was based on a lot of philosophical and theological ideas evolving over time. A really good book. If you haven't read that, I highly recommend it. But what he says, we had an interview where we discussed the history of British intelligence and esotericism, and that's part of the reason why I think it's appropriate to call it an occult empire, because not only is UK/City of London and so forth the home of Marxism, right? It's the beginning of Marxism. It's also the headquarters, I believe, still of international socialism. It pioneered the way in terms of freeing the slaves, supposedly, with William, what's that guy's name? I always forget his name.
Wilberforce?
Wilberforce, yes. Now, that sounds so humanitarian, doesn't it, right? But it's really not. I don't believe that the Crusades on the part of British persons, now they might have had a lot of sincere people who believed in their ideologies, but I don't think that abolitionism was what the British establishment was promoting because they're lovers of humanity. They're not. And they were a Malthusian empire while they were promoting the end to the slave trade. And that was really, I think, just another form of economic attack on the part of the British. But that's a whole that's a different story.
Well, that's the same thing with Lincoln's war against the American South. Yeah,
exactly. It is exactly the same. Yeah, it's the wage slave industrialist model, banker model.
I think Catherine Austin Fitz talked about that, how the finances of the slave trade had shifted, that it now at some level it paid to end slavery, the international slave trade. And this isn't disparaging Wilberforce's motives. At each stage of the game, there are people who have good motivations, or well-intentioned, who then can be used.
Yes.
Yeah.
Have you read Dabney's Defense of Virginia and the South?
No, I have not.
That's a good book that will touch on some of this. But yeah.
Is that what's that? Dabney's Defense of Virginia and the South?
R.L. Dabney was a famous Presbyterian theologian, and I read quite a bit of Dabney back when I was in my early phases of Calvinist idiocy, back in my early 20s. But yeah, I had a pastor, a Calvinist pastor, who was very into Confederate history. So
well, actually, there was a reference. I have a textbook that I have in my I'm having my daughter read regarding the war between the states, and I think there was a reference to him. I have to look that up again. I remember seeing that name in one of the chapters, so I have to look back at that.
Well, I certainly wouldn't recommend Dabney on theology, but that Defense of Virginia and the South is an interesting treatise that most people find pretty convincing.
Yeah.
If anyone could ever get anybody to read it, because that's so taboo. But anyway, we were talking about so the occult empire is just another way to talk about how. Oh, and I was saying, what else comes out of London and Albion? Well, what else? Witchcraft and Satanism. That's like the world capital of witchcraft and Satanism, and world Freemasonry. Now, is it an accident that all of these so-called ideologies of Enlightenment and scientific revolution, Royal Society, Darwinism, don't forget that. Why do they all emanate out of London? Like what? When are we ever going to start hearing about London's errors, as you were saying to Michael Jones?
Yeah, it's I never hear appeasing Germany. What about appeasing Britain? Why do you
exactly?
Germany didn't burn the White House in 1814. Right?
Yeah, you never hear about the terrorists like John Brown, by the way.
No. Did you get that cartoon I sent you?
I did.
Yeah, that's a classic.
Very illustrative, yes.
Yeah, that was 1911, and it's by Robert Minor, and it shows Karl Marx surrounded by these enthusiastic Wall Street guys, Morgan, George Perkins, Rockefeller, Carnegie, and there's with Teddy Roosevelt there, and they're enthusiastically shaking Marx's hand, saying, "Delighted to meet you." Delighted to meet you.
Well, think about Arab Spring and the funding of Mujahideen. They might have different ideologies, but it's the exact same strategy.
Yes, exactly. Now, in your talk, you basically, you talked about democracy. It's a cover for banker oligarchy. Oh, I'm sorry. First, I want to make a point regarding this philosophical corruption. I think you made a point in your talk about the problem with it is that you would say that a proper philosophical outlook towards regarding the West, maybe the West, would be the traditional religious view would look at metaphysics and objective truth. The British way, or the occult way, it's you're dealing with it's materialism, it's pragmatism, and it's situational ethics. You can justify
absolutely.
And this is what we're seeing played out. Well, of course, in the Opium Wars, in Britain's various intrigues around the globe. Today, the shenanigans of MI6 and CIA around the world. There's no sense of morality or objective truth to their actions. You can lie. You can be a James Bond. You can be a Sidney Riley. Because you're just doing your job, right?
Yes. I think that you and I have talked quite a few times about medieval philosophy and the Reformation and all that, and we don't have to go into all that, but if you look at England at the time of Henry VIII and the split of the Anglican so-called church from the Catholic Church. I think that is a pivotal point in England's history and its trek. And at that time, and with Elizabeth, you just have this a dark flourishing of alchemy, of the occult, and of Hermeticism. You can see it all throughout the Elizabethan dramas, from Ben Jonson to John Donne to any of those characters. Shakespeare, it's all alchemical. If you read Spencer's Fairy Queen, it's all based on Hermetic, Kabbalistic. It's kind of a synthesis of all sort of mysticisms. And so what I'm saying is that shows the ideology that Britain has. And what happens most of the time when, I believe, nation states depart from historic Orthodox Christianity, what happens is they become tools of the state most often. That's, of course, at least the reasoning why there's supposed to be the papal states, is that it's supposed to be independent of the government. But whether it's that kind of an example, or the history of Byzantium with Caesaropapism, so-called, and the battles that the Eastern Church had for so many centuries with heretical emperors and monarchs, it's the same tendency or problem where the king tries to control the religion and the church. And so if you divide or split from traditional Orthodox thought, at least my view goes, what's left? Well, you have to concoct some kind of state mythology. And the concocting of a state mythology seems to be best done through some form of all the traditional mythologies, right? Mm-hmm. So what happens with Britain? Well, if you read Spencer's Fairy Queen, it's supposed to be the new mythology of the British Empire. It's supposed to be the encapsulation of Britain as the successor to Rome. Isn't that interesting? That's what I was just saying earlier about what all of these great powers want to do, is to characterize and mythologize and write themselves into the long march of history as the successor to the Roman Empire. So who is the successor to the Roman Empire? Well, Britain's version is that it's an alchemical, mystical, divine body. I'm not joking when I say that, because they would speak of, for example, Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, as this sort of embodiment of this divine feminine, right? This divine great matriarch, an incarnation of the goddess. And I'm not joking when I say that. That's how it's pictured in a lot of the statist literature of that time, which is, crown propaganda, especially from Spencer. So that's proof that England sees itself as at least after its abandoning of traditional Christianity, it sees itself as an occult empire. And there's no question in my mind. I mean, I've had grad classes where we talked about it openly. So that's what we're dealing with here. And that occult empire saw the necessity to destroy the Christian empires, Russia, Germany, because there would be oppositions to them. And what better way to do that than with subversive ideologies and the list that you gave earlier: pragmatism, monetarism, usury, relativism, scientism, situationalist ethics. All of these things are manifestations of subversion and inversion, and you basically just unleash these things, not just through Marx or through some movement. You unleash the ideas, because the ideologies are the real virus that infect people. I mean, when I go out and if I talk to people just randomly, I've done this many times, most people, 9 out of 10, will be relativists. They will say there is no objective truth. It's just whatever you want, man. Now, that's the dominant ideology of our day. Ratzinger even had a whole book on that, right? So why is that? Well, because it's been inculcated into everybody through centuries of propaganda. And who were the big thinkers that started that? Kant, Berkeley, Hume, Locke. These are the empiricist philosophers of the Enlightenment. And their empirical philosophy leads to the conclusion that everything is in flux, There's no objective truth. Metaphysics is a waste of time. Religion is nonsense. It's gobbledygook. And all there is flux. Well, so what happens then? The Royal Society comes along and it basically crafts, right, Masonic craft. It crafts all of the other new ideologies. Darwinism, Marxism, socialism, internationalism, all of these things become, and as Dugan points out, I think he's right, it's kind of inherent within Britain as a sea power to be international, right? Because they're a merchant sea power. They had the army. I mean, excuse me, they didn't have an army. They had the Navy, right? The British Navy. So they're just like they're an predecessor of the Venetians. It's all about commerce, trade, mammon, right? And this is set against, I think, somewhat accurately, the land power represented by Russia or Eurasia. And you can see why, if you had a land power as where your progeny originated, somewhat similar to Germany, you could see why the people would believe in stability, stasis, things staying the same, because it's fixed. You have a land. You have a place to live. It doesn't consistently change every few years. If you live in a great megalopolis, metropolis, cosmopolitan area, it's all new, always new ideas. All ideas are basically placed onto the same level, and therefore relativism. So mammon and relativism go well together.
Excellent. Yes. Yeah. Great point. The island nations have always been kind of unstable. Now, it's fine because Britain is very conservative at home, but radiates radicalism abroad. And as America has been subsumed into the Anglosphere, she became sort of a international, a force of instability herself. All in the name of national security and global world order, of course. As we saw what happened, around the turn of the 19th, 20th century, with the development of the Pilgrim Society, Union Now. This is all part of the Rhodes Project, which,
Absolutely.
again, goes back to Masonic principles.
Hey, and by the way, it's Quigley who says that Rhodes developed the inner circle. That's the name of the secret society that would really know things. And then the outer helpers, the helpers. It sounds so neat and nice.
Yeah.
All the helpers. But these are the dupes. These are the tools who believe in the baloney that's put out that, this is all for freedom and democracy and humanity. Meanwhile, they're all openly Malthusian because they all hate humanity. So, yes, and even, the history of British intelligence is, the amazing level of British duplicity. The British are known for duplicity.
Yeah, Perfidious Albion, I think, is.
Yes.
No, good example. You mentioned Mammon, and in your talk, you talked about how Quigley writes about this is post-World War II, the post-war economic era, and the economic system that was instituted, the Bretton Woods system. This is what he termed the pluralist economy, how it intentionally marginalized gold. You could no longer redeem. Only central banks could redeem gold, and the United States had all the gold, so the dollar was ascendant. But gold was marginalized, and according to Quigley, this is part of Quigley the apologist, this is done to stabilize the global economy. This is the new economics, sort of Keynesian view, where you have, I guess, constant or gradual inflation to spur growth, and this creates the Phillips curve and the post-war economic system, which only lasted 27 years before it collapsed. But when you were reading this to me, when I was listening to you in this lecture, it almost sounded like he was trying to justify the post-war Keynesian order, just so they could get away with stealing all the gold.
It does sound like that. And
because you're saying, because it's a typical post-war thing where we need gradual inflation. Then we need to turn things off a bit and have a recession. This is the Phillips curve, where you manage growth with, you have a certain amount of inflation to create growth, and you have too much inflation, then you have to create a recession to cool things off a little bit, sort of fine-tune the economy.
I remember the part that you're talking about, and to be honest with you, I don't know what Quigley's saying.
Yeah, I think.
That could be my own lack of clarity. I could be not understanding it, but I don't understand given his position as a person who favors third wave convergence, but yet I don't understand what he's saying about gold. I'll just be honest with you. I don't get it.
Yeah. But I think what it is, I think it's just a justification to, to further alienate people from like a sound commodity-based money, to justify, the fiat dollar debt system. And,
but at times he admits that it is a stabilizing force.
Yeah.
He'll say that at times, and then at times he'll say that it was necessary at this time to go off the gold standard. And so I don't know. Maybe he's just all over the board.
Well, this is the pragmatism, right? That we were talking about.
Exactly.
There's no, and of course, look at Milton Friedman. He wrote one of the greatest essays ever in defense of the gold standard back in the '60s when he was a Ayn Rand devotee, and of course, then he becomes the Federal Reserve Chairman and creates the greatest, inflationary boom in history, which of course was popped.
Well, if we remember early on, Quigley said that, and I mean he wrote this over a long period of time, so maybe he learned new things. I don't know, but early on he said that the gold standard was the old beta plan of the bankers.
Yeah.
But then later on he says, but it can stabilize an economy at times. But at times it's not good because it allows whoever controls the gold to run the economy. They can wreck it or whatever.
Yeah.
But he definitely admits that through all of this smoke and mirror economics, there does seem to be people in the background who are basically stealing the gold.
Yeah, and it's just all this academic talk is just cover, smoke and mirrors.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Because for some reason they hoard the gold. I mean, to me that tells me something.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
you see the Keynesian blah 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 blah, and then it's like, well, who's got the freaking gold? Where is it? It's in an underground vault. The bankers have it. Don't worry.
Yeah, don't worry about it. We're responsible to have it secured at Fort Knox.
Yeah, right.
Can we see it? No. Germany wants their gold back. You can get it in 7 years in increments. Why we loan it out or whatever. Why we hypothecate it. I think that's the term they use.
Well, I think another thing I'd like to mention too, commonalities in international capitalism or monopoly capitalism, as Quigley terms it, and international socialism. And that's what's important, because these commonalities show that both of these so-called systems really have the same. They're two roads that take you to the same destination, and that's why you can have big meetings between Bush Sr. and Gorbachev at Malta, facilitated by John Paul II, right?
Or David Rockefeller flying into Moscow, right?
Yes. Why would we have that? Well, because if you read Malachi Martin's Jesus' Blood, you'll have 800 pages that treats that, and I don't trust that dude one bit, but that book is still a decent geopolitical analysis. But because, number one, off the top of my head from memory, they're both international in flavor and tone and desire. Both of them want to control the globe by their inherent nature, because they're ideological. Even monopoly capitalism is ideological. They're both based on rationalism and scientism and pragmatism. Now, that may sound contradictory, but it's not, because it's a kind of, well, look at the way that Henry Ford was interested in standardizing his plants.
Mm-hmm.
And you had that research done into, what's the most efficient way that the guy on the factory line can do X, Y, Z in the most efficient amount of time, right?
That Taylorism or something?
Yes, that rationalism, my mind's turning into mush here. Who's the guy that wrote on the Spirit of Capitalism? Max Weber.
Okay,
Weber talked about, now I'm not pro-Weber, but I'm saying he's right when he says that there is inherent within it this quantification obsession, and that's what Ford was into. And so that is it's mirrored in a corporate sense in the state apparatus of something like Stalinism or the bureaucracy of the U.S. The EU, right? Where you've seen, I'm sure, the EU laws about just these insane laws of cameras can only have 30 minutes of video recording time. You can only have a certain amount of cinnamon in your Danish cinnamon bun.
Yes.
I'm not joking. These ridiculous, right? So the obsession with bureaucratic regulation is common to monopoly capitalism and international communism or socialism or Marxism. And many more commonalities could be found, but really it's a facade of, do you want a corporate state or do you want a state?
Yeah.
I mean, they're the same thing. And so, yeah.
Well, you mentioned the fusionism that why a Rockefeller can meet with Brezhnev or Soviet premier or go to China and admire Mao.
Remember David Rockefeller's New York Times editorial?
Yes, praising Mao.
I think that Mao's done a great job in China. This is what we need for America. A one-child policy.
Hey, listen, David, you got a few million you can loan me?
Yes, Tim, I have a few million, but at $1 billion interest.
He'll loan you $2 million, but you got to pay back $10 billion.
Can I just sell my soul and give it to me? No, but that fusionism is what Catherine Casey, when she was doing investigative work for Norman Dodd, who was
exactly
the reason. Yes. It's what caused her to have an emotional breakdown, because in reading the minutes of I think it was the Carnegie Foundation, she found this plan.
It was, yes,
to create this fusionism between communism and capitalism is what you're spelling out here, right? This sort of, they have the same objective, same end.
This is a third wave ideology. This is Alvin Toffler, this is Newt Gingrich, this is Quigley. Quigley is Clinton's mentor, and if you Google third wave, you'll get Clinton and Tony Blair as the faces of third wave.
And this is where you get in the part where you make the provocative statement that Karl Marx was a libertarian.
Yes, I know that's very hard to hear. It's a hard pill. I didn't know that. I mean, when I had a graduate class on Marxism and critical theory, and we mainly focused on the Frankfurt School for the second half of the semester, but for the first half, it was the young Hegelians and Karl Marx and that guy that Marx liked so much, who was the radical atheist. His name escapes me, but he's like he's one of the major influences on Marx, who was really spearheading German atheism at that time. Proudhon? No, not Proudhon. Yes, it is. It's Proudhon. And no, he's French. I can't remember the guy's name, but the original idea of Marx was that you would have an imminent rising up of the proletariat. And Marx didn't believe, and this is what not many people understand, he did not believe capitalism was bad or evil. He believed that it was oppressive, but that it was the natural historical stage and development after feudalism. So Marxism is all about historical analysis and historical phases and determinism, right? The long march of history. They believed that you could scientifically study it and determine what would come with absolute certainty. And so what would come after the period of industrialization and big state capitalism would be the revolution. The revolution would not bring the libertarian freedom, it would bring big state communism. Then after big state communism, that is Eastern Bloc Stalin-style communism, the state would wither away, because industrialization, Marx thought, would create the mechanization by which everyone could live freely. So he thought that capitalism was necessary to produce advanced technology and mechanization to an extent that no one would have to work. So, I mean, you can kind of see the logic of how he thought that, right? Because he was seeing such rapid progress in technology and industrialization at his time. And he thought that was not necessarily a bad thing, because when he argued for free trade, he said all this oppression is going to make everybody pissed. So we should have free trade because the workers are going to get mad. That'll lead to revolution. It also leads to internationalism, continental blocs, which is what Marx favored. So that would lead to revolution. Revolution would lead to communism. That would be big state communism. Big state communism would fall into the withering away of the state, and then you could wake up and go fishing and paint a picture at the end of the day. That's all you have to do.
Yeah, this was the, I guess was it the butterfly complex or something, or you could just go from one thing to another and not.
You're free. You know, the mechanization has done away with labor.
Labor, yeah,
not needed anymore. Right?
Was it the Fourier complex or something, if I recall, something like that?
Could be.
Yeah,
could be, but
where you could ride on he had some vision where people would fly around on like lions with wings, and the sea would
be this is where
lemonade
you get
or something.
This is where you get Russian cosmism and all the utopian artwork and paintings of the communist era in Russia, where they're like picturing the glistening Star Trek style stuff. Right, because all of technology is going to save us. And that makes sense because Marxism is all about man interacting with matter, and that man and matter interacting through dialectical process would overcome the alienation from nature that man felt. That's why Marxism is also the father of the environmental movement. Marxism, I believe Engels has one of the earliest first treatises on modern ecology, and it's all, of course, Darwinian, and it's all about man overcoming his alienation from nature, which is a result of capitalism and production and the factory owner owning the means of production and all this stuff. And so, all of these utopian ideologies are very Gnostic in origin. A lot of people have written on this. This is no secret. Eric Voegelin, even Cardinal Ratzinger has written on this point, pointing to Joachim of Fior. So you had a lot of these predecessors in Europe too, who were these utopian sectarians, Thomas Müntzer, and they kind of fell into a Gnostic sort of vision of the coming era, the third era, the era of the spirit. And that's all influential in Marxism, except this is where you get Hegel too, with Hegel's idealism. And then what Marx does is, of course, collapse the idealism into the material and say that, look, the new man is the worker, and the worker will overcome when he realizes that the tools that he's working with are reflections of himself, right? Matter and nature are a reflection of man. And once man overcomes this dialectical opposition, he'll overcome all the dialectical oppositions between himself and other people, and that means nation states and borders will fall away. We'll realize that we're all the same kind of evolving creature, just a part of nature, and then that's all part of the utopian era, right? So the irony is that this is all very metaphysical, and yet it's all supposed to be based on scientific rejection of metaphysics. But I mean, listen to this gobbledygook, right? It's like the most fanciful. This sounds like, some hipster guy on the corner tripping acid, right? This is what he comes up with. We're all just gonna live together, man, and if we could, it's like transhumanism, right?
Yeah, there's no regard for, one thing is bad anthropology, no regard for human nature,
right?
And no sense. Basically, it's very destructive because you create a philosophy or a worldview which destabilizes, I think, essential institutions and traditions, which are the glue of which hold society together, make it function.
Yes, and
in a practical sense.
It places all of man's problems upon an external social order.
Yeah,
and that's not man's problem.
And it goes back to materialism versus metaphysical. Yeah,
right.
Metaphysical approach. Yeah. Now, before I let you go, you made an interesting observation, also in the talk regarding the public works scam and central planning, and I'm particularly interested in some of the observations you made regarding the Tennessee Valley Authority, how this model is a scam just for private firms or private, for billionaires to steal more money from the people through public works.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's what Quigley says. And what do these people always say is the solution? More of the same.
Yeah.
Right? more bureaucracy, more government, more statist apparatus, more centralization. That'll solve the problems that centralization caused.
But yeah,
So what is TVA? Well, TVA mirrors Stalin's public works projects, and FDR, as we said, comes up with this. Well, he doesn't come up with it. It's his people in the background whispering in his ear, who are all the same CFR type persons. This is what Servando Gonzalez's book points out very well.
Who also came up with the Marshall Plan, was a CFR plan. They just put Marshall's name on it. Yeah.
Right, and this is where it ties into Bolton's piece, where with Stalin not exactly doing what was intended, as Bolton argues at least, and from Quigley. So, what's the problem? Well, the problem is that the idea here is that the government can just create all this stuff, and that it just works because the government can create it. Now, the problem is who pays for it. Where does the money come to pay for all the public works projects?
Oh, yeah. Ultimately, it's labor and resources from the people. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. And that's what... So who does FDR go to? Well, he goes to the bankers. and he runs up all this debt, and he freezes gold. And what's going to pay for all of this? The next several decades are going to pay for it.
Generations of people are debt slaves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So these public works projects, you say, well, do they work? Well, they work in the sense that, I can go see a dam that was built for this Manhattan Project, and that's another indicator here, is that, was this really about giving everybody a chicken in the pot and a job? No. You're working so that the military-industrial complex and shadow government can build this, secret Manhattan Project energy thing, whatever it is, whatever you think about nukes and bombs and all that.
Yeah.
Their nuclear energy is real, so that it's utilized. It's the establishment utilizing the energy of the people, giving them a pittance so that the elite can benefit and become the dominant superpower in the world, which they kind of were, but you know what I mean.
And it also creates a huge monopoly or cartel. There's a good book called FDR's Folly, and there's a big section on the Tennessee Valley Authority and the boondoggle that it is, and the opportunity cost, the destruction of hundreds of thousands of acres of agricultural land, the displacement...
Stealing people's land,
Yeah, the displacement of tens of thousands of farmers, poor people, by the way, many poor black people, and the destruction of local electric companies that were decentralized and competitive. And this is all for rural electrification. Of course, another parallel here is Lenin loved the idea of electrification, and so did FDR, right? So there you go. But yeah, it's a huge... And again, it goes to creating these huge cartels. Now everyone's dependent on these huge centralized, electric companies, cartels or combines. And
that's an interesting point. Yeah, the whole energy is an entire other rabbit hole to go down, and this makes Tennessee into a huge part of a big energy corridor. There's a lot of nuke plants around Tennessee, and all of that comes out of the TVA. Which again, why was the TVA built? Why are these big dams and all? Well, it's all for the Manhattan Project, and you can read the history of the TVA, and it says that. Why was there a Manhattan Project? Oh, well, we gotta, be the dominant force in the Cold War, in World War II and the Cold War. Well, if World War II and the Cold War were essentially banker engineered, then the Manhattan Project, that suggests to me, the Manhattan Project, like Sophia Smallstorm argues, was more about transhumanist ideology and experimentation in the biosphere in a large-scale way. And that's why Jonas Salk plays into it with his Malthusianism, because all these people, these bankers and these Royal Society types, they're all Malthusians. They're all transhumanists. They coined the term. So they're not, what they say the Manhattan Project's for is not what it's for.
Yeah, and that's why after Manhattan Project you have MK Ultra, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Which is a very broad experiment, I think, a multi-pronged.
I think so too.
Yeah. Much more than what we hear about Hollywood, or it's
right.
It's about, well, I think it's about anything is controlling and manipulating society and the transformation of humanity itself, perhaps. So
I believe so, and they believe that. They truly believe their gospel.
Yeah. So, well, Jay, you're on the road. I'm gonna let you concentrate and get on your way there. I want to thank you for taking the time out. I know you're tired to come and talk to me about
Thank you.
It's a great analysis. That was part 3 of Tradegy and Hope. Part 4 is coming out soon, in a few days, I understand.
Yeah, a couple days. Yep.
Great. Okay, there's part 4. And although we just scratched the surface here, so I urge people who enjoyed this talk to subscribe to Jay's analysis and get the full talk. Because there's a lot there. There's other stuff that he does. He analyzes other works, books, and so there's a lot there to get for a mere, just under $5 a month. So
a mere pittance.
A mere pittance. So, and it's fiat dollars, so it's really nothing. So.
Yes, a mere pittance. Think of what you pay the bankers and the elite, and think of what you could pay me to learn how to battle them. Right? A mere pittance.
So let's get back to that.
Cheaper than a cup of coffee a day.
So let's get back to Tennessee and enjoy that fine summer weather down there. So.
Yes, I'm going to visit the Kentucky Dam and the Manhattan Project nuke plants, and which, by the way, the Oak Ridge facility that built the Manhattan Project is now a giant NSA facility.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, without the Manhattan Project, you wouldn't have had the Oak Ridge boys.
Giddy up, mouth, Elvira. Yes. Growing up in Tennessee, unfortunately, you will hear the Oak Ridge Boys. When I was about 4 years old, that was my favorite song, Elvira.
That's right. Okay, Jay, thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you, Tim.
Again soon. Enjoy the summer, and I look forward to those things coming out. Anything else coming up? Anything else that you want to plug before I let you go?
No, that's the main thing.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, get on the road or whatever. Drive safely. Enjoy the trip back, and we'll be in touch. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks, and have a good night.
Good night. Bye.